Aisha had always known that reaching the top would not be easy. From a young age, she had watched her mother work tirelessly to provide for their family, taking on multiple jobs just to make ends meet. That determination had stayed with her, guiding her every choice and ambition. She had spent years building her tech company from scratch, turning a small startup into a company that was now on the verge of a $900 million deal with one of the wealthiest families in the country. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, and she had prepared for it with meticulous care. Every presentation, every slide, every number in her reports had been checked and rechecked. On the day of the meeting, she woke up early, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. She dressed carefully in a sharp suit that commanded respect, a symbol of her authority and professionalism. She knew the room she was about to enter would be filled with power and influence, people who had grown up in wealth and privilege. She reminded herself that while they might have money, she had knowledge, experience, and the ability to navigate complex business challenges. That was her strength. The drive to the billionaire family's estate was long, but Aisha used the time to review her presentation one last time. She thought about the moments that had led her here, from late nights coding with a small team to negotiating her first big client contracts. She reminded herself of the obstacles she had overcome, from doubters who said a young black woman could not succeed in tech, to investors who underestimated her abilities. Those memories fueled her determination, giving her the confidence that she could handle anything the meeting threw at her. When she arrived, the estate was more luxurious than she had imagined. High walls, perfectly trimmed gardens, and marble floors gave an immediate impression of wealth and power. Aisha took a deep breath and entered the boardroom, feeling the weight of the room and the eyes of everyone in it. The family members were already seated, and their expressions were polite but distant. She sensed immediately that she would have to prove herself not just as a capable CEO, but as someone worthy of being taken seriously in their world. As the meeting began, Aisha started her presentation. Her voice was steady, her words clear, and her slides were filled with precise data and compelling visuals. She walked them through the potential of her company's technology, the growth projections, and how the partnership could be mutually beneficial. At first, everything seemed to be going smoothly. She saw some nods from her own team, subtle signs of encouragement that reminded her she was not alone. But then the tone in the room shifted. One of the family members, a man in his late 60s with a commanding presence, interrupted her mid-sentence. His questions were pointed and his comments carried a hint of condescension. He seemed determined to undermine her authority, asking why her company deserved a deal of this size and questioning the reliability of her projections. The interruptions grew more frequent, and soon, the rest of the family joined in with subtle but sharp remarks about her background, her experience, and even the way she spoke. Aisha felt the sting of humiliation, but she refused to show it. She had prepared for moments like this. She kept her posture straight, her voice calm, and her eyes focused on the details of her presentation. She knew that reacting with anger or frustration would only give them an advantage. Instead, she listened carefully, taking notes and observing their reactions. She noticed the small things, the way one of the advisors was whispering to another, the way a family member's smile didn't quite reach their eyes. Every detail was information she could use to her advantage. Her team shifted in their seats, some looking uncomfortable, sensing the tension in the room. Aisha gave them a small, reassuring nod, silently telling them to stay calm and trust her lead. She understood that in these moments her role was not just to defend the company, but to protect the morale and focus of her team. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she was here because of her skill, her knowledge, and her perseverance. Nothing they said could diminish her value or the years of hard work that had built the company she led. As the interruptions continued, Aisha began to strategically plan her next move. She realized that to gain the upper hand, she would need to listen more than she spoke, to absorb their doubts and use them against the weaknesses in their own arguments. She noticed inconsistencies in the points they raised, contradictions that revealed a lack of understanding about her company's technology and potential. She made mental notes to address each one clearly, using evidence and logic rather than emotion. At one point, a family member laughed quietly after a dismissive comment, clearly expecting her to falter under pressure. Instead, Aisha paused, smiled politely, and continued her presentation with even more clarity and confidence. She emphasized the strengths of her company, highlighting case studies and successful projects that demonstrated reliability and innovation. Slowly, she could feel a subtle shift. Some of the family members leaned forward, showing signs of interest rather than dismissal. The advisors who had whispered among themselves were now listening more attentively, their expressions neutral but focused. During a short break in the meeting, Aisha stepped aside with her assistant. Her assistant whispered that some of the clauses in the contract being drafted by the family's lawyers were heavily biased, giving the family undue control and limiting her company's flexibility. Aisha understood the stakes. Accepting those terms could mean compromising the company's future. She realized she had a decision to make: continue to endure the humiliation and risk losing her company's autonomy, or assert herself and turn the situation around entirely. Aisha chose the latter. She used the break to review her notes and prepare a calm but firm response. She reminded herself that the power in the room was not just in wealth but in knowledge, preparation, and strategic thinking. She considered each potential objection the family might raise and planned clear, concise counterpoints. Her goal was not just to defend her company, but to demonstrate her authority and expertise in a way that could not be ignored. As the meeting resumed, Aisha felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that the next moments would be crucial in defining not only the outcome of the deal, but also the perception of her capabilities. The family might have wealth and status, but she had skill, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to her company's success. She was ready to face their scrutiny head-on, knowing that how she handled this situation could change everything. The tension in the room was palpable, but Aisha's focus never wavered. She was determined to turn this challenge into an opportunity, proving that respect is earned through competence, preparation, and the courage to stand firm in the face of adversity. As the meeting resumed, the atmosphere in the boardroom was tense. Aisha felt the weight of the family's expectations pressing down on her, but she also felt a quiet confidence. She knew that how she handled the next moments could determine the success of the $900 million deal. Her mind was clear, focused, and ready. She had spent months preparing, and now it was time to show that preparation and expertise mattered more than arrogance or wealth. The family continued their questioning, their tone sharp and condescending. They questioned her leadership, the capability of her team, and the accuracy of the projections she had presented. They seemed determined to find a weakness, any flaw that could be used to undermine her authority. But Aisha stayed calm. She listened carefully to each interruption, making mental notes and jotting down points on a small pad in front of her. She knew that responding with anger or defensiveness would only play into their expectations of her, so she chose strategy instead. Aisha realized that one of the family members, the eldest daughter, was particularly difficult. She asked questions not to gain understanding but to subtly suggest that Aisha was inexperienced and unworthy of leading such a large deal. Each comment carried a hint of skepticism about Aisha's background and her ability to manage a company of her size. It was humiliating, but Aisha refused to let it shake her confidence. She reminded herself that she had built this company from nothing, navigating countless challenges that most people could not imagine. She had earned her place in that room regardless of anyone's opinion. Her team was visibly anxious. They knew that the stakes were high and that the family's behavior could have been intimidating for anyone. But Aisha gave them a reassuring look, silently signaling them to trust her lead. She understood that their focus and morale depended on her composure. By staying calm and collected, she set the tone for how the rest of the meeting would unfold. During a particularly harsh interruption, Aisha paused. She let the comment hang in the air for a moment, acknowledging it without showing offense. Then she continued her presentation with renewed clarity and emphasis, highlighting the successful projects her company had completed, the measurable results achieved, and the innovative solutions her technology offered. Her voice remained steady, her words precise, and her delivery confident. She began to notice subtle changes in the room. Some of the advisors, who had earlier seemed dismissive, were now leaning forward, listening more attentively. The family members' expressions, while still guarded, showed signs of curiosity rather than outright skepticism. Aisha realized that the key was not just in defending her company, but in turning the meeting into a demonstration of her expertise. She began to point out inconsistencies in the family's own assumptions and the limitations in the way they were approaching the deal. Each point was backed by data, examples, and clear reasoning. Slowly, the energy in the room began to shift. The power dynamic that had initially favored the billionaires was starting to level. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Aisha could feel it. During the next break, her assistant whispered that some of the contract clauses drafted by the family's lawyers were unfair. They heavily favored the family, limiting her company's control over the partnership. Accepting these terms could compromise the future of her company, leaving them vulnerable despite the magnitude of the deal. Aisha understood immediately that she needed to address these clauses with precision and authority. She spent the break reviewing her notes, anticipating the arguments the family might make, and planning her counterpoints. When the meeting resumed, Aisha approached the discussion with calm authority. She started with the clauses that concerned her most, explaining clearly why they could be detrimental to both parties if accepted. She suggested alternative terms that protected her company's interests, while also showing how these adjustments would benefit the billionaires. Her tone was firm, professional, and persuasive. She did not argue emotionally. She presented logic and evidence that could not be easily dismissed. The family initially reacted with surprise. They had expected her to yield or falter under pressure, but Aisha's confident and strategic approach caught them off guard. Some of the advisors whispered among themselves, acknowledging the validity of her points. The eldest daughter, who had been particularly condescending, paused for a moment, reconsidering her previous assumptions. Aisha sensed the shift in the room. The conversation was no longer about her background or race. It was about her competence, intelligence, and the value her company could bring to the partnership. As she continued, Aisha demonstrated a deep understanding of the market and the potential for growth. She shared real-world examples, analytics, and forecasts that clearly showed the financial upside of her proposals. Each example was carefully chosen to illustrate her company's capabilities and the risks of ignoring her recommendations. The presentation was no longer just a defense of her company. It had transformed into a display of leadership, vision, and expertise. The family, initially skeptical and dismissive, began to engage more thoughtfully. Questions became more focused and interruptions less frequent. Aisha answered each question with clarity, never losing her composure, and always redirecting the conversation to the facts and projections that supported her proposals. She maintained a balance between assertiveness and professionalism, ensuring that respect was commanded without confrontation. Her team watched with growing admiration. They had seen her face challenges before, but this was different. The level of scrutiny, the deliberate attempts to undermine her, and the high stakes made the situation intense. Yet Aisha navigated it with skill and poise, demonstrating why she had earned the trust of investors, clients, and her own team. Every moment reinforced the lesson that true leadership is about maintaining composure under pressure and using knowledge as power. By the end of the session, Aisha had successfully addressed every concern and challenge posed by the family. She had not only defended her company's position, but had also subtly shifted the dynamic of the meeting. The billionaires who had intended to humiliate her were now listening and considering her proposals seriously. Her ability to stay calm, strategic, and composed had turned the meeting from a potential disaster into an opportunity to showcase her expertise. Aisha stepped out of the boardroom for a short break, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. She knew the hardest part was over, but she also knew that the deal was still fragile. The family's respect was beginning to shift in her favor, but the outcome depended on maintaining that momentum. She took a moment to gather her thoughts, reminding herself that preparation, patience, and strategy were her greatest assets. The humiliation she had endured earlier now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a growing sense of confidence that she could navigate this challenge and emerge victorious. In the quiet of the hall, Aisha reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the long nights working with a small dedicated team to the countless negotiations with skeptical investors, she had learned resilience, determination, and the power of preparation. These lessons were proving invaluable now, allowing her to face one of the most powerful families in the country without fear or hesitation. She understood that while wealth and status could intimidate many, knowledge, preparation, and composure could command respect even in the most challenging circumstances. As she returned to the boardroom, Aisha felt a renewed sense of purpose. The family might have money, influence, and connections, but she had vision, skill, and the ability to think strategically under pressure. She was ready to continue the negotiation, confident that the next steps would allow her to not only defend her company, but also assert its value in a way that could not be ignored. The tension in the room was still present, but Aisha's focus and determination had shifted the balance. She was no longer just a participant in the meeting. She was a force to be reckoned with, ready to take control and ensure that the $900 million deal reflected the true worth of her company and the hard work of her team. When the meeting resumed, Aisha walked back into the boardroom with a quiet confidence. She had spent the break reviewing every detail, analyzing the contracts, and thinking about the best way to communicate her perspective. The family had attempted to assert their authority earlier, but Aisha now felt prepared to turn the situation around completely. She understood that respect in this room would not come from pleading or yielding. It would come from demonstrating her knowledge, foresight, and strategic thinking. Aisha began by addressing the unfair clauses in the contract. She spoke clearly and calmly, explaining why certain terms could create significant risks for her company, while also pointing out how they could negatively impact the family if ignored. She suggested alternative terms that were fair, balanced, and mutually beneficial. Her tone was professional yet firm, showing that she was not there to be intimidated or manipulated. Each point she made was backed with data, charts, and examples that left little room for argument. The room grew quiet as she presented her ideas. The family, who had earlier tried to humiliate her, now had to pay attention. They had underestimated her, assuming that wealth and influence would intimidate her into submission. Instead, they were met with precision, clarity, and confidence. Aisha continued moving from point to point, addressing every concern with detailed reasoning and thoughtful analysis. She illustrated the potential growth for both parties using real numbers, case studies, and comparisons that made her proposals compelling and difficult to dismiss. One of the family members, who had been particularly condescending earlier, leaned back in his chair, clearly surprised. He had expected her to falter under pressure, but she had done the opposite. Her composure and intelligence commanded respect. Aisha noticed the subtle changes in the room. The advisors who had whispered among themselves were now paying close attention, some nodding slightly in agreement. Even the eldest daughter, who had been dismissive, seemed to reconsider her previous stance. Aisha also took the opportunity to showcase her company's long-term vision. She described not just the immediate benefits of the deal, but the ways in which the partnership could evolve to create even greater success. She shared projections for future growth, explained how the technology could adapt to market changes, and highlighted the innovative strategies her team had developed. Her explanations were clear, concise, and convincing, making it evident that she had anticipated challenges and planned solutions in advance. Throughout her presentation, Aisha maintained a balance between assertiveness and respect. She was firm in defending her company's interests but never confrontational. She understood that the goal was not to belittle the family, but to ensure that they recognized her expertise and the value her company brought to the table. Every word, every gesture, every chart on her slides was chosen to reinforce that message. She was proving that respect is earned through knowledge, preparation, and professionalism, not by status or wealth alone. The family began to engage differently. Questions became more thoughtful, interruptions less frequent. They asked about specifics, wanting to understand her reasoning and projections in detail. Aisha answered each question with clarity, supporting her points with evidence and logical explanation. Her ability to anticipate objections and provide solutions impressed even the skeptics in the room. The energy shifted, and she could feel the subtle change in the dynamic. The power that had initially been in the hands of the billionaires was now more balanced. Aisha's team watched in awe. They had known their CEO was capable, but seeing her handle such a high-pressure situation with such skill and poise was inspiring. The earlier humiliation, which had seemed so daunting, was now turning into a testament to her strength and leadership. Every decision she made, every word she spoke, reinforced why she was the one leading this company and why she had earned the right to sit at this table. As she continued, Aisha introduced a few bold strategies that had not been part of the original deal. She explained how these strategies could increase revenue, reduce risk, and create a long-term competitive advantage. The family listened intently, realizing that she was not only defending her position, but also adding value beyond what they had initially expected. They began to see her as a partner with insight and vision, not just a business owner negotiating a contract. Aisha noticed that the body language in the room was changing. Some of the family members were nodding in agreement, advisors were taking notes, and the previously dismissive eldest daughter was now leaning forward, clearly engaged. The subtle shifts in posture and attention told her that she had begun to turn the tide. She was no longer the target of condescension. She was a respected voice in the conversation, someone whose expertise could not be ignored. She also skillfully addressed the potential risks the family might have been concerned about. By acknowledging these risks and providing practical solutions, Aisha demonstrated that she was not naive or overly optimistic. She had a realistic understanding of the market and her company's capabilities, and she communicated that understanding with authority. This approach reassured the family that working with her was not a gamble, but a calculated, mutually beneficial opportunity. Throughout the meeting, Aisha remained calm and composed. Even when one of the family members tried to challenge her by suggesting hypothetical scenarios designed to test her knowledge, she responded with clear, logical answers. Her ability to stay composed under pressure, combined with her deep understanding of the subject matter, gradually earned their respect. They realized that their attempts to undermine her earlier had failed, and now they had no choice but to acknowledge her competence. By the end of the session, Aisha had not only defended her company's interest but had also demonstrated a level of expertise and leadership that impressed even the most skeptical members of the family. The meeting that had begun with humiliation and doubt had transformed into an opportunity for Aisha to showcase her skills, strategy, and vision. The room, which had been filled with tension and condescension, now carried an air of respect and professional recognition. As the meeting concluded, Aisha knew that she had successfully shifted the dynamic. The billionaires had started the meeting with the assumption that their wealth and status would dominate the conversation, but they had underestimated her. Through preparation, composure, and strategic thinking, she had turned the situation around, gaining respect and demonstrating her value beyond any financial figure. Her team felt a sense of pride and relief, seeing their leader not only survive but thrive in the most challenging environment. Walking out of the boardroom for another short break, Aisha felt a mixture of relief and determination. She had handled the initial challenges and turned the meeting in her favor, but she knew the final steps of the negotiation were still ahead. The respect she had earned would be critical in the upcoming discussions. She reminded herself to stay focused, to maintain the momentum she had created, and to continue using her knowledge and strategy to guide the conversation toward a fair and beneficial agreement. Aisha reflected on how far she had come. From her humble beginnings to leading a company on the verge of a $900 million deal, she had learned that true leadership required resilience, confidence, and the ability to navigate even the most intimidating situations. She understood that respect is earned, not given, and that knowledge, preparation, and strategic thinking were her most powerful tools. The meeting was not just about money. It was a test of character, skill, and composure, and she had passed with distinction. As she re-entered the boardroom, Aisha felt ready to tackle the next phase of negotiations. She knew the family would continue to test her, but she also knew that she had already established herself as a competent, authoritative, and visionary leader. The dynamic had shifted, and she was prepared to guide the conversation to a successful outcome, ensuring that the deal would reflect the true value of her company and the hard work of her team. She walked confidently to the front, ready to continue the negotiation with focus, clarity, and unwavering determination. The room had changed since the start of the meeting. The initial condescension had faded, replaced with an attentive, if cautious, curiosity. Aisha sensed the shift and knew that the next phase was crucial. She had proven her competence and professionalism, but she also needed to assert her authority decisively to ensure that the deal would be fair and advantageous for her company. As the discussion progressed, one of the family members attempted to regain control by pushing for clauses that heavily favored their side. Their tone carried the same subtle arrogance from earlier, as if expecting her to cave under pressure. Aisha, however, remained calm. She had anticipated this tactic and was prepared with counter-arguments. She responded with clarity and precision, explaining why these terms could jeopardize the partnership and offering alternative language that protected her company while still benefiting the family. Her delivery was firm, unshakable, and professional. The family listened closely. They had expected her to falter, But her unwavering composure and detailed reasoning made it clear that she was not a negotiator to be underestimated. Aisha moved systematically through each point of contention, demonstrating not only her understanding of the contract, but also her strategic vision for the partnership. Every explanation was backed by evidence and examples, showing that her company's proposals were not only fair, but also grounded in market realities and practical experience. At one point, a particularly skeptical family member challenged her with a hypothetical scenario designed to test her decision-making under pressure. Aisha addressed it calmly, walking through each element of the scenario and explaining the solutions her team had already considered. Her answers were precise and thorough, leaving no room for doubt about her competence. The room grew quieter, the tension easing slightly as her authority became more apparent. It was clear that the initial attempts to undermine her were now having the opposite effect. Aisha noticed the subtle changes in body language around the table. Advisors who had once whispered among themselves were now paying close attention, jotting down notes. The eldest daughter, who had been one of the most dismissive voices, leaned forward, seemingly engaged and reconsidering her earlier assumptions. These small, almost imperceptible shifts signaled that Aisha had gained the respect and attention she needed to assert control over the negotiation. She used this momentum to introduce strategic ideas that were not part of the original discussion. These ideas focused on long-term growth and shared benefits, illustrating that her vision extended beyond immediate financial gains. Aisha explained how the partnership could evolve, showing projections, market trends, and potential innovations that could enhance value for both parties. Her ability to think several steps ahead impressed the family and their advisors, demonstrating that she was not only a competent negotiator, but also a visionary leader. Throughout the discussion, Aisha maintained her composure. Even when the family attempted to reassert dominance with pointed questions and critical comments, she responded with calm authority. She did not let the occasional sarcastic remark or challenging tone affect her focus. Instead, she used each challenge as an opportunity to reinforce her points and demonstrate the depth of her understanding. Her professionalism and strategic approach gradually shifted the power dynamic, making it clear that she was an equal, if not superior, partner in the negotiation. Her team observed quietly, inspired by her poise and strength. They had anticipated a tough meeting, but witnessing Aisha handle every challenge with such confidence was remarkable. She had turned what could have been a humiliating encounter into a demonstration of leadership, intelligence, and authority. Each calculated response and clear explanation solidified their trust in her, reinforcing why she was the CEO and the leader of this deal. As the conversation progressed, the family began to engage more constructively. Their questions became focused on details rather than undermining her authority. Aisha addressed each inquiry with thorough explanations, highlighting the practical benefits and mitigating any perceived risks. By presenting solutions and alternatives instead of just defending her position, she showed that she was not only capable, but also collaborative and forward-thinking. This approach fostered a more productive dialogue, gradually transforming a tense negotiation into a meaningful discussion about shared goals and mutual success. Aisha also ensured that her team's contributions were recognized. She highlighted the expertise of her colleagues, showing that the company's success was built on collaboration and diverse skill sets. This not only reinforced the credibility of her company, but also demonstrated her leadership style, one that valued teamwork, insight, and collective intelligence. The family began to see that the strength of the partnership lay not just in her vision but in the combined capability of her entire team. During a critical moment, the family pushed back against one of Aisha's proposed changes, insisting on a particular clause that heavily favored them. She listened carefully, then calmly explained why the clause would be detrimental in practical terms, offering an alternative that maintained fairness while still addressing their concerns. Her explanation was clear, logical, and difficult to refute. The family paused, realizing that her knowledge and preparation made her position unassailable. They had no choice but to consider her terms seriously. By the end of the session, the atmosphere in the room had transformed completely. The billionaires who had started the meeting with condescension were now listening attentively, acknowledging her points and engaging in constructive dialogue. Their respect for her capabilities was evident, and even those who had been the harshest critics were now contemplating her suggestions with interest and consideration. Aisha's strategy had worked, the power dynamic had shifted, and she had established herself as a competent, authoritative, and visionary leader. She stepped out for a brief break, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and focus. She had successfully defended her company's interests, gained the family's respect, and set the stage for the final stages of negotiation. However, she knew that the deal was not yet finalized. Maintaining momentum, staying vigilant, and continuing to assert authority would be crucial. She reminded herself to stay composed, think strategically, and guide the conversation toward a fair and beneficial agreement for her company. Reflecting on the meeting so far, Aisha recognized that this experience was more than just a business negotiation. It was a test of her resilience, composure, and ability to command respect under pressure. The humiliation she had faced initially had been transformed into an opportunity to demonstrate her skill, intelligence, and leadership. She had shown that true power comes from preparation, knowledge, and the courage to stand firm, not from wealth or status alone. As she re-entered the boardroom, Aisha felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had turned the meeting in her favor and had established a strong foundation of respect and authority. The family now understood that she was not only capable but also strategic and insightful. She was ready to navigate the remaining discussions, ensuring that the $900 million deal would reflect the true value of her company, the hard work of her team, and the vision she had worked tirelessly to achieve.